Michelle Junot-Katsuya, okay, who was actually the head of CSIS Asia Pacific Division at one point. He's someone who was agitating for decades, basically saying, look at this influence, look at what we found, and so forth. But this was often, frankly, almost always met with no response, with basically with kind of ignorance. So we have this Sidewinder report from 1997. Then we have this newly revealed Project Dragon Lord report, which basically is the U.S. interagency group discovering what was happening in Canada and saying, well, this is a serious national security threat to the U.S., this level of infiltration that Sidewinder has revealed, and further work which they discovered. And all of this, basically, both Sidewinder and Dragonlord, at least publicly, being largely ignored for 25 years. And this is where we get to today, where the level of Chinese Communist Party influence, both in Canada, we have, multiple politicians which have been, basically supported in their election for by the Chinese Communist Party in some way. And this is what actually CSIS had to leak, ostensibly. And Scott, and I agree with this analysis, they leaked it because of frustration, right? Because simply, no one's listening to us. We're briefing, different political bodies on this crazy stuff that we're finding, but we're not actually able to affect any change. There isn't political will for that. And that is actually kind of a master success of the United Front Work Department, an ability to prevent the political class, for example, of a country to act on very damning counterintelligence.
But we do know that, Michelle, you will be appearing in front of a special committee this week. Can you give us a sense of what you're going to say?
Basically, it will be in the same perspective, and I'll be offering also some options of and action that needs to be taken if we are serious at protecting our democracy. But definitely what needs to be done is to put the kind of framework and accountability system that will prevent any temptation, because this is what happened at the end. This is the temptation that the previous government led themselves to let certain situations evolve to the point where they were manipulated.
It's a grave concern, Frank, and I think you've touched on something really important, which is that we just sort of keep acting like none of this is of any great significance. I mean, a couple of things come to mind. First of all, to be clear, you use the term controlled asset. People in the intelligence business get pulled down the rabbit hole, as we would have said, to varying degrees, by which I mean they get compromised to varying degrees. Some folks, will only go so far. But the goal of an intelligence operation, an espionage operation by any competent service, and that's certainly the Chinese, is to recruit a person in the sense that you gain control over them. If they are not controlled, if they do not take direction, if they do not communicate as you tell them to, provide the information, that's not an asset. In CIA, you claim you've recruited a guy. He doesn't dance to that tune, if you will. He's not an asset. Now, how exactly that works in practice, it varies. That doesn't mean you necessarily show up to a meeting and bark instruction to somebody. But the point is, one way or the other, you're pulling the strings and they're doing what they're told. So we should not be under any illusion here that what the Chinese are ultimately looking for is just to be able to blackmail somebody or get some favors. I mean, maybe that's true in some cases. That's what they settle for. That is not the goal. It's certainly not the goal of recruiting American government officials. Not that they will do favors. It's that they will work, in effect, for the Chinese government, for the Chinese Communist Party. So as terrifying as that sounds, and as bizarre as that may sound to people who have never been in the trade, that's the way it works. And if you think this kind of thing is just sort of incidental, and it's not really going to alter the strategic balance of power, I would commend to you the Manhattan Project and the Russian atomic bomb program, right? 1945, there was exactly one nation on Earth which had nuclear arms. That was the United States of America, and nobody else was close to achieving that. We had, had we wished to use it, complete military superiority over everyone on the planet. Within a few years, the Russians detonated a bomb, and we moved into the Cold War and the whole mutually assured destruction thing. Well, the Russians didn't go create a Manhattan Project. The Russians stole everything from Los Alamos. I mean, the first bomb they detonated was down to the location and the size of the bolts, the second device that we set off. I mean, if we had outsourced construction of the device to the Russians, it could not have been more identical.
Listen, I just recently even learned that there was U.S. Navy officers, one specifically was explaining to me how he was taught at one point that, the U.S. is a declining power, right? So this is the so-called Thucydides trap, Thucydides trap, and China is the ascending power. Your job is to help facilitate a sort of calm, peaceful, transition of the U.S. decline to China's ascendancy, right? And they were actually taught this in the military. Can you imagine? So again, I didn't answer your question directly, but to me, that type of mentality of like the Chinese under the Chinese Communist Party are going to be successful, and we want to be on the right side of that, or that this isn't a threat, or creates these situations like you mentioned, right, where you have Canadian ministers basically deciding to use what appear to be social credit control type systems, which is direct from the Chinese Communist Party playbook.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China, because their basic dictatorship.
It's an iceberg. We should change course, right? And me talking about Biden or us talking about elite capture, I mean, these are all very important things. But what's the fundamental issue here? The fundamental issue is we've entered into what is a completely mad relationship with a hostile totalitarian government. We make them richer and more powerful by the moment. We enable them in every way. As the analogy I've used with you many times, Frank, imagine it's the height of the Cold War when somebody is suggesting a policy where we're going to shut down our industrial base and rely upon factories in the Soviet Union, and we're going to make Brezhnev richer, and we're going to help the Russians build better tanks. And, I mean, you couldn't have finished those statements without somebody telling you, okay, you need some serious therapy and probably some medication. That's suicidal. Well, that is where we are, right? So we're on all of this stuff coming from the fact that we are feeding the monster that's going to kill us. So we got to go back to the root of this thing, and we have to change course.